Welcome to Good Goodbyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. We are really glad you found us. In this podcast, me, Simon, a funeral director,
and me, Tina, I'm an independent celebrant.
we're going to discuss all things funeral in an informal space to demystify what happens when we say goodbye.
Based on your questions and queries, Si and myself are two industry professionals that are going to chat through the hows, whats and wherefores. We actively work in the funeral industry in Devon in the UK. So, we hope you enjoy the episode ahead. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. Hello, this is Tina. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. And I have a guest with me today, Brendan Day. And I'm going to encourage Brendan to talk a little bit about the Greener Globe, funeral standards and the work that he does. But it's a real pleasure to have you here, Brendan. Welcome.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And today it's quite a nice, bright autumn day for both of us. So we're both sitting in the sunshine. Listeners, you can imagine that. So, Brendan, how did you first get interested in greener funeral practices? Was there kind of a light bulb moment? How did you come to it?
Well, for me, it's been a gradual process, actually. Coming from a small market town in Shropshire, Wellington, as it was before it became a new town, I became involved in cemeteries when my father took over the supervision of the local facilities. It's got to be in the 1970s. So he'd supervise the staff. My mother would fill in the burial registers. I remember backfilling one grave on a Saturday morning, and that's how I started in this field. And then I was quite fortunate. A post came up as a trainee superintendent and registrar of cemeteries and crematoria of Wolverhampton, which was a wonderful title, but it was really difficult to get that on my wedding certificate. It's so long. But that's how I came to be involved in it. And I've seen over the years how things have changed. And if I could, just for a little bit of background, I'd like to give you a quote from Ken West. Now, Ken introduced the first natural burial ground back in the 1980s. But in his book, he refers to when he started in the 1960s. And he writes about how three old men cycled into the cemetery each day and hand-scythed using the large and heavy English scythe, cutting from one side of the cemetery to the other over about 3 months. In between the cuts, the wildflowers grew at various stages, and the cemetery was teeming with voles, butterflies, and crickets. A barn owl fed on the voles and resided in the church steeple on site. There was no understanding of habitat, and complaints were constant about the long grass and unkempt beards. But this was also a period of burgeoning technology, and I joined the team who chemically sprayed this area with grass growth retarders, malachydrazide and herbicides, 2,4,5-T, developed in the United States. The managers were infused with this new horticultural science, and over a few years, the herbage was tamed. Memorials were levelled, and we introduced rotary mowers, which were then a relatively modern technology. The scythers were dismissed. Consequently, the wildflowers, butterflies, crickets, voles, and inevitably the barn owl disappeared. But with tidiness, the complaints stopped. So that was sort of the background to the 60s. And when I started in 1980s, all that was in full swing. We were spraying everything everywhere. And we thought we were doing a great job trying to get everything really to look like a Commonwealth War Graves cemetery. That's what the public wanted. They wanted short grass everywhere. So Ken, who I was working for then, he'd also written a trail for people to go around the cemetery and look at the wildlife. Because even though it was limited, there were other Victorian trees matured. So there's quite a bit of wildlife about in an urban area. And then he went on to Carlisle, where he developed the first natural burial ground, a woodland burial ground. And I was kept in touch with Ken, and that interested me. So then I introduced one in Cardiff. and saw the benefits of that. And so gradually over my career, I've sort of grown into this role, having realised the mistakes we'd made, and we really destroyed so much wildlife over the years. And these cemeteries could be such fantastic centres of wildlife, especially within urban environments. So I've been very much on a journey myself. And I realised, somebody said to me back into 2020, you should start an environmental award for crematoria. And I said, you leave that one with me. And that Christmas, I started a company, started thinking about what we could do to green the sector. And I realised quite quickly, if we're going to green crematoria, it'll be necessary first to bring the funeral directors on board, because they're the gatekeepers, they advise the families. If we could bring funeral directors on board to advise families of what's available, then that would drive change, both up their supply chains with suppliers and also downstream at SEMS and CREMS. And sort of almost 5 years later, here I am, and we've got about almost 80 sites now, funeral directors, suppliers, cemeteries and crematoria, all trying to improve how they can work more sustainably and make funerals more sustainable.
That's such a fantastic explanation. And in my mind, I'm imagining myself walking through Teignmouth Cemetery, which is close to where I live in a seaside town in Devon in the UK. And that is a long grass, wilded area. And it's very beautiful. And if you sit there, you can hear the bird song. It's just a very magical place to be. But I know from signage around it that is a more recent development in the last 3 to 5 years. So I think we're rediscovering some of this stuff all together in our communities, aren't we?
I think that's a really good phrase. It's rediscovering, because it is about educating people. Because we live in a commercial world, whether it's funeral directors, cemeteries, crematorium suppliers, unless what we're seeking, a more sustainable future, is commercially viable, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. We can all hook trees, but it won't make the side greener. So it's about educating people. So they want more sustainable solutions. And then they ask their funeral directors what's available. So the funeral directors will speak to cemeteries and crematorium managers, coffin suppliers, and say, what's in your range that's greener? And gradually we're rediscovering what could be a most beautiful world, really, instead of just monocultures of tightly grown, tightly cut grass.
Yeah. And for lay people listening in who aren't sort of working in our industry but are planning funerals or thinking about funerals, what is a green goodbye? If I've not heard that terminology before, what does that mean to you, Brendan? How can we explain it to them?
I think, a green goodbye for me now, and so coming on this journey, and as we audit funeral directors and everybody else, we've realised there's far more to a green goodbye than simply a nice looking coffin and a woodland burial. As green as they are, and I'd say that's got to be one of the greenest funerals, is a funeral with low carbon miles. So people use a local funeral director who then purchases perhaps a willow coffin where that's been grown locally, and then it's been woven by somebody locally, and they use a local burial ground. The sort of the impact on environment from CO2 can be absolutely minimal. And also, if it's a natural burial ground, it's going to be encouraging wildlife. It'll have diversity of wildlife, diversity of habitat. So that is probably a goal.
Yeah.
That some of us can achieve. Some of us are lucky, and we live near these places. And we've got funeral directors who understand this. But for 80% of families now, it'll be a cremation. So what's a greener goodbye with a cremation? And I think the only way we can really know that is for families to ask their funeral director. to ask about the coffee, that they want something that's got minimal impact on the environment. Where are they produced? What is it produced from? Because, willow coffins are incredibly attractive. Now, we've seen a few buried, where they've been woven with flowers as well. They're absolutely wonderful. But if that's been shipped from the Far East into the UK, it's not as good as it could be. So it's about asking as well about the crematorium, asking the funeral director to find out the local crematoria. Do they do things like carryover? Are they talking to their suppliers or to their cremator suppliers? Because they can radically reduce the amount of CO2 they produce. But that's something none of us are going to see unless we ask. So I think it's quite complex, but to find these things out, but really it's asking families, ask your funeral director, why is this one greener than another one?
And it is quite multi-layered, isn't it? Because what I talk to people about as an independent celebrant, because on occasions families find their way to me first, and then I'll help them commission a funeral director. And if they particularly want to explore green, then I'll say things to them like, consider travel. So if you've got everybody going and Wales, I know where you live is an issue for some families, having to travel a long way to a crematorium, then right back to another place to have a wake. And so you can consider things like having everything close together, physically close together. You can consider, using a village hall down the road so that there isn't a lot of travel, which, you're asking a lot of people to travel. You could have a bus, take everyone at once, which is something, you don't see families do very often, but you could certainly consider that. And things like not printing your order of service, but having it digitally available. So there's all sorts of little ways that beyond the things that we're talking about, Brendan, like the coffin and the flowers, and that there are other ways that families think, oh God, yeah, of course. If we want it to be greener, we have to maybe think about these other things as well.
Absolutely. Things like travel share. Asking the families, anybody got any space, we'll share a car instead of taking everybody going in their own cars. It really is. It was said at one time that the largest amount of CO2 was not the cremation. It was all the family travelling to the crematorium into the petrol and diesel cars. It was the largest source of CO2. So absolutely get a bus, share the travel. Or if you're a very long way away, and perhaps an immediate family. I know when a colleague of mine died, and his wife died, and he was over 200 miles away, I watched the service online. I emailed him in advance and told him, I'd be there with him and I'd be thinking of him. I watched it online, and that was incredibly moving to be part of that.
Yeah,
and he appreciated that as well. Rather than drive 200 miles each way, it's just quiet moment to.
No, yeah, I can see how that would be really helpful, and something you could do is, you can turn the service around on its head, so you can gather together with the coffin in some place. You can have a service. You can wave goodbye to the coffin as it goes off on its own. And maybe family members, immediate members might join that the following day for it actually to be, the cremation to happen. Or it might be that the cremation happens, and everyone else stays behind for the wake. So there's ways to think about it. You're quite right. Because I think
it's just like thinking, about your footprint throughout the funeral. And there are, as you say, there's so many different things. And using flowers out of the garden instead of buying flowers, or asking for them not to be wrapped in cellophane. Which again, an oasis is an absolute curse, which is why the Royal Horticultural Society banned it some years ago from any of their shows. I'm hoping that either we will transition to an alternative, or again, as a sector, we will decide that perhaps we don't want oasis anymore.
Yeah, I think there are greener options being explored and created every day, aren't they, for things like floral arrangements. What sort of how do people normally react when you go to talk to them about greener options? Are they curious? Are they surprised, or what do you find the reactions are?
They are curious. I think that's very fair. I'd say you've summed it up very well in being curious and surprised that they can do so much, that they don't. Because again, because we don't talk about funerals in the wider sense, we don't talk them in sort of environmental sense. Don't talk about them that way either, which is really unfortunate. Because again, it provides people with the funeral that they might really, really want. They live, more and more of us live our lives closer in some respects to sustainability, even if it's just the separating the waste every week for the bin collection. It's impacting more and more on everybody's lives. Everybody's becoming more aware of it. And I think more and more people are buying into it.
Yeah.
So if they know that they can take that with them in their funeral, that their funeral can also be shaped to add that ethos to their funeral that they've lived with for many years. And obviously we're seeing this more and more with younger generations. I can remember some years ago in Cardiff, when we opened our first natural burial ground, and this elderly gentleman came along, he just lost his wife, and he had his children with him, who were past their early 20s. And they came to see me and they said, this is what we want. We really like this. But then the elderly gentleman says, this is what you would have loved. But you will cut the grass every week, won't you? We had to explain that, no, we would cut it sort of twice a year and rake it away. So it's something that we're seeing more and more with younger generations who are really aware of the environment and the negative impact it's had, and it's having on all of us.
Mm.
So,
and I heard, I think that younger generation thing is such a truth. And I heard a lovely story the other day I'll share with you, Brendan, which was somebody, in their 50s out with their grandchild, and they saw some litter on the road. And the grandchild's about 3 or 4, and picked up the litter. Once it was insistent on picking up the litter, didn't want to walk past it, picked it up, put it in a nearby bin. And as she put it in the bin, she went, "That's for you, planet." Which is endearing, isn't it? She's only
it's so
little.
endearing.
And the grandma wrote her a card from the planet, thanking her very much for keeping the planet tidy.
No, that's a lovely thing to do. But I know my own grandchildren, 6 and 10, 6 and 11, again, they go on litter picks, with their mum. A few of them come together, their friends, and they enjoy doing it. And they see the benefits. It's so obvious, really, isn't it? And again, because another issue, as you'll be aware, is the granite memorials. And with a lot of granite being shipped from China, India, South Africa. And again, we need to transition to something else. We're not going to stop that unless there's legislation. We won't stop that. And when I was the manager at Cardiff and up in the West Midlands of cemeteries with the crematoria, I was quite happy to see it coming in. Whereas now I look at it and it just looks so incongruous. It's sit there in a sort of predominantly green environment with the trees and the grass, and then these hard black shapes, because all black granite and there's no naturally occurring black granite in the UK. So it's the most popular, but it has to be shipped the furthest. But again, we do have alternative stones in the UK, softer stones, which will wear, especially the Welsh slate. What's nice for the Welsh slate, a soft stone. And then we're employing people in the community. It is, at the moment, commercially, it's very difficult. But if we could grow demand, then prices should come down. So there's all these things that we can be doing, and more people, I'm pleased to say, are doing.
Yeah.
They just need to be told about them.
Yeah.
And when they're given the choice, more people are taking the greener choice.
Do you think having an eco funeral, a greener funeral, does that help with grieving process in any way that's different from a traditional funeral?
I think it will, for those people who are environmentally aware and who live sustainably, where, because there is something very visceral, I think, in all of us, linking us to the environment. And as more people become aware of it, I think it's incredibly meaningful if that's then reflected in their funeral, for the people around them, for their families around them. They can see that funeral reflects the person, and it has a certain beauty, doesn't it? I believe when you see a coffin with natural, locally grown flowers, rather than again these sorts of very attractive but formal types of arrangements that almost belong in a Victorian, a post-Victorian era when funerals were very formal. You know, at all stages, and the religiosity of it was very formal, and the funeral director reflected that. And in the cemeteries, you know that on the footpath edge, the big memorials are, because that's where the most expensive graves were. And as you move into the centre of burial sections, graves got cheaper and cheaper. The most expensive ones being around the chapels. Those were the prime locations. So rich people put those very large memorials to all adds to that formality, which now is largely being wiped away or drifting away. Because again, I think it's something organic where people are moving away from this. And yet, at times, we still have this formality hanging on, like with the floral tributes. But as I say, I think that's something again where we will see more change. We were meeting with a lovely lady recently who's got a flower farm, and she grows the flowers. And often, and with brides as well, they would just like bunches of particular flowers that are in season that they will then create themselves and form a tribute. And again, that's going to be incredibly therapeutic. We see with willow coffins, more people helping weave their loved ones' coffins. And again, that's incredibly visceral, isn't it? Rather than just purchasing something that you're helping create for the loved one. Which again, I know this, you can lead into this whole direct cremation debate, where there's sort of little to none of that sort of direct involvement, unless it's added on perhaps when family receives the urn of ashes, they then have a service around that, which again is well known on the continent, where funerals like that take place for many, many years.
And I did a service for a family in the summer, in the graveyard, interment of ashes. They'd had a direct cremation. They hadn't really realised that their goodbye would be sort of circumvented by the fact that their mum was taken away to be cremated, and that was the last time they saw her, and they didn't realise there wouldn't be a service. So I think it was a bit of a moment of realization for them. But what they decided when they got the ashes was that they wanted to do this service, and we stood around. It was a very warm day. We had lots of brollies to sun under because it was hot, and we stood around and we told stories of her and the things that were her personal legacies to them all. We played some music, and it was a very lovely moment, and they designed it all themselves, and I helped them deliver it. So I think that families having ownership of that is so helpful, isn't it? And the more we distance from death, I mean, there's still a lot in the COVID inquiry about how we're all feeling after not being able to be around deaths and to say our goodbyes in the way that we'd hoped. So I think more evidence will come from that, really.
I think it will.
Yeah.
And I do think that, and again, we saw this in cremation that originally, we go back sort of like 1902 when the Cremation Act first came out, and the vast majority of remains were scattered on site. And then gradually, certainly by the 1980s when I entered the sector, the vast majority of ashes were kept on site. We were discovering the families wanted more and more memorialisation. They wanted that individual location to go to, and we were providing that. But more and more ashes then started being taken away. And I can't remember, but I remember, doing a graph, and a year came when more ashes left the site, they stayed on. And they go and, when people got married, where they were courted, football pitches, all these special places for people. But as all that gets taken away from the crematorium then becomes more of a processor, which I've always felt is a great change personally. I felt that was a great change that we're taking what was a repository of the dead, just like the cemeteries were in Victorian times, into a place now where we will process human remains from one format to another.
Yeah,
but
and the place we only go for that processing,
yes,
and we don't return to very often. Yeah,
no,
it's a change that's kind of evolved, isn't it?
it has. Yes, it's certainly evolved since I started in the 1980s, and perhaps it reflects a sort of wider societal changes and people moving away from rituals. But having said that, equally, moving away from formal ritualisation with religious services to things that are more informal and reflect the individual. I think in society, it's become more about the individual in sort of the wider society or the wider family. Families have got smaller. And it seems that the death process is now reflecting that as well. Whether it's a good thing, whether we will see the trend with direct cremation declining now, whether it's reached its peak, obviously nobody knows.
Yeah. And I think the more that we're all talking about it and the informed, in an informed way. So, my wish as a celebrant is that people make informed decisions, and that's the thing that concerns me about the way that direct cremation is advertised and presented to people. The language suggests that we are a burden and a financial burden in particular, and that if we sign up for this process, it will release our families from burden. And all I ever ask people to consider is absolutely look into it if it interests you, by all means, but just consider the fact that there are people around who will miss you, and saying goodbye is part of a grief process. It allows us to let go, to celebrate what people were to us, all of the things that matter. And if we never have those opportunities, it can actually make us really struggle with that grief. So that's all that I ever say to folks is, please do consider carefully and tell your family that this is what you intend. Because
that's so important.
Yeah.
And on so many different levels. And it's the same, with environmental choices. I know not far from me here in South Wales, where a family had a burial in a natural burial ground. And they hated it. They didn't know, they weren't fully informed what to expect. And when they got there, they just felt it was all overgrown. They wanted a sort of managed environmental cemetery, for want of a better phrase. So they ended up having an exhumation.
Oh gosh, that was they seriously were worried then, yeah.
Yeah, very stressing. So after that, the cemetery owners decided they would, for any funeral booked to burial with them, they would insist member of the family have to come around first and visit, and they would show them around, and they would show them the exact spot where the burial will take place.
That makes such logical sense, doesn't it? Really?
No, absolutely. And again, what's always makes me smile. Just to add another story, I back in when the latest James Bond character appeared, and I'd followed James Bond all my life. I was so impressed. I decided I would have to have a treat, and I would buy the same watch as he has. And I thought, well, why not? You're only young once. So I went to the jewellers, and I explained what I wanted. And as soon as I told them I was invited in, I was sat down, I was bought a cup of coffee. Out came this watch, out came the box. Typical male thing. They got it was about an inch thick, the instructions. I went through it. They explained how it would, it would work within 2 minutes every 10 years or something wonderful, and how I would be able to dive down to 100 meters, and if the light would still see it, at which point my wife cut in and says the only time I'll see any water is when he's in the shower, which I thought was rather a harsh thing to say. I mean, what so interests me about that is I paid for that watch what many people pay for a grave.
Mm.
And how many times is the family brought in beforehand, sat down, given a drink, gone through all the details, all the fine print, explaining this is what it's all about before they commit, before they sign. You know, often now, especially in London, several £1,000s for a grave. And I think, again, somehow it doesn't reflect the importance and the value, the cost of that. There should be a lot more interaction between the person purchasing it, person selling it. I'm sure in many other areas, you know, this would be investigated by which or whoever, and you know, they make recommendations.
Mm.
Family should be given all the details.
Yeah.
Instead, you know, just see a funeral director, I want a burial, want this, that, and funerals arranged by a caring funeral director. I'm not being critical. But for the family, the first time they see that grave, it's probably on the day of the funeral.
Yeah. And you're right that maybe it's our societal issues in talking about death, but the one person who you can really go and talk to about death, who's really happy to receive you and will put the kettle on, is usually your funeral director.
Yes.
You know, popping into your high street funeral director and talking to them about opportunities. You know, I'm always happy to answer the phone, and it doesn't matter whether a client uses me or not, but, you know, I just want them to be making those informed decisions, as you quite rightly say. Yeah. Well, you could be in a Bond film then, Brendan. It would have to be called what, You Only Live Once, or you're only young once.
Well, I was in a film with Michael Caine once. I was working as a manager in Cheltenham. I was a deputy at the time. Michael Caine was making a film there about his son who died at GHQ, the clock one. And I had to deal with them all that day. I was appointed to the liaison person. So I went in my black suit and black tie and black cromby and all the rest. And the director came up to me partway through the day and said, well, what happens on a burial? And I thought then, you know, that's something not knowing what happens on a burial. But I explained, he said, you know, the film director will throw the soil on top of the coffin when the minister says the words. And he says, oh, we've got nobody to be the funeral director. Would you take that part?
There you go.
There we go. So I spent a very nice day with Gordon Jackson and Michael Caine and a few other Whistleblower, if you want to see it.
Okay, I'm going to write this down and I'm going to put it in the show notes for people.
It's that all day on a freezing cold November day filming this. And I think I'm in it for precisely 3 seconds.
So your own funeral then, Brendan, when you come to this day, many, many years ahead, what have you considered what you would like?
Well, I think I must admit I'm starting to waver slightly now. I had settled on cremation many years ago, and my ashes going back home to Wellington, where back in Wellington Cemetery, where sort of the career started with Mum and Dad. But again, having visited a number of natural burial grounds, woodland burial grounds, and come to appreciate more and more the beauty of nature, then I could be swayed. I shall have to revisit Wellington Cemetery and see if they've moved with the times as well.
Yeah,
I'm sure they have. I'd hope they've got some sort of natural burial ground. But yeah, and I'm not too worried about services and that. But I think you know, as we've already discussed, the key thing about this is getting it over to the children. It's what's best for them. What do they feel? And I suppose that's where it can be difficult for a lot of families, because like the centre of the funeral, the deceased in some respects, the advocate, you know, is not there to advocate for anything. And we'll often say, and if I've heard it said once over the years, I've heard it 1,000 times, when my time comes, you can put me on the compost heap or on the council tip. A number of times I've heard people say that. But when the time does come, They don't go on the compost heap. So family love them so much.
Yeah.
So it is all about trying to get over it, I think, to the family. You know, for me, it's going to be the location back home. That's my spiritual home. I mean, so I spent my youth there and then travelled to work in Wolverhampton, London, Cheltenham, Cardiff, and then Sandwell in the West Midlands. And now we live in Cardiff. It's where all our children and grandchildren are. But I see the only time I will go back home is in spirit, as they say.
Perfect. So in the show notes, we're going to link people to the work that Brendan and his company do around greener globe and funeral standards. And it's something you can look out for if you're preparing a funeral. Is it something that your funeral director has signed up for? You know, you can be a bit intrigued about that. So I'll definitely put that in the show notes, Brendan, and a few more links as well. But if you've got any final words you'd like to say to our listeners?
I think
just on this podcast, not in a literal sense, of course.
No. I only say it is the most rewarding and wonderful sector to work in. I always say to people, we all fall into this area, you know, completely out of the blue. But once you get into it, you never get out of it because you never want to. It's just so rewarding working with so many great people over the years.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for being a guest, Brendan. It's been lovely talking to you. And thank you for being on Good Goobyes.
You've been listening to Good Goobyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment and share. Drop any questions on our social media, on Instagram, or in the text option in the show notes.
Si and I are qualified professionals, but we always advise our clients to seek any additional support from medical practitioners if they need to. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay well and be kind to one another.